Few figures in modern history have elicited such polarized reactions as Fidel Castro. To his supporters, he was a David confronting the Goliath of American imperialism, a champion of the downtrodden who brought literacy, healthcare, and social justice to his people. To his detractors, he was a ruthless dictator who trampled on human rights, stifled dissent, and plunged his country into economic stagnation. His long shadow looms large over Cuba, even years after his death, a testament to the enduring power of his personality and the complexities of his legacy. This essay will delve into the life and times of Fidel Castro, exploring the events that shaped his worldview and the contradictions that defined his rule. Born into relative privilege, Castro's life was marked by a keen awareness of social injustice. This awareness, coupled with a potent mix of charisma, ambition, and ruthlessness, propelled him on a revolutionary path that would irrevocably alter the fate of Cuba and reverberate throughout the world. From his early days as a student activist to his triumphant entry into Havana and his defiant stand against the United States, Castro's life was a whirlwind of revolution, Cold War intrigue, and audacious social experiments. His story is a cautionary tale of the intoxicating allure of power and the fine line between liberation and tyranny. Fidel Alejandro Castro Ruz was born on August 13, 1926, near the town of Biran in rural Cuba. His father, Angel Castro, was a Spanish immigrant who had achieved considerable wealth as a sugarcane planter. Young Fidel enjoyed a privileged upbringing, attending Jesuit schools where he excelled academically and displayed a natural talent for leadership. However, the stark inequalities of Cuban society, where a small elite prospered while the masses endured poverty and disenfranchisement, left a deep impression on him. Castro's worldview was further shaped by his experiences at the University of Havana, where he immersed himself in the heady atmosphere of student politics and developed a passion for social justice. Influenced by the writings of Marx, Lenin, and Marti, he became increasingly critical of the corruption and inequality that plagued Cuba under the dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista. Castro's growing radicalism led him to join the Ortodoxo Party, a reformist group committed to social justice and national sovereignty. His fiery oratory and unwavering commitment to the plight of the poor quickly made him a rising star within the party and earned him the admiration of his peers. On July 26, 1953, Fidel Castro, along with his brother Raul and a band of 160 young revolutionaries, launched a daring attack on the Moncada barracks in Santiago de Cuba. Their goal was to spark a popular uprising against the Batista regime, which had seized power in a coup d'etat the previous year. The attack was a military disaster, poorly planned and swiftly crushed by Batista's forces. Many of the rebels were killed, and Fidel and Raul were captured and imprisoned. Though a tactical failure, the Moncada assault marked a turning point in Castro's life and the Cuban Revolution. During his trial, Castro delivered a now famous speech, "History will absolve me," in which he eloquently defended his actions and outlined his vision for a free and just Cuba. The speech, smuggled out of prison and widely circulated, transformed Castro into a national hero and a symbol of resistance against Batista's dictatorship. After serving 2 years of his sentence, Castro was released under a general amnesty and went into exile in Mexico, where he met a young Argentine doctor named Ernesto Che Guevara. Section 4. Triumph in Havana. The guerrilla becomes Comandante. In Mexico, Castro, Che Guevara, and other exiled revolutionaries regrouped and began plotting their return to Cuba. They formed a small guerrilla army, which they christened the 26th of July Movement in honor of their ill-fated attack on the Moncada barracks. On December 2nd, 1956, Castro and his ragtag band of 82 fighters landed on the shores of Cuba aboard the overcrowded yacht, Grandma. They were immediately met by Batista's forces, and only a handful of the revolutionaries survived the initial encounter. Undeterred, Castro and his remaining comrades retreated into the rugged Sierra Maestra mountains, where they waged a grueling guerrilla war against Batista's army. From their mountain stronghold, the rebels, led by Castro's charisma and strategic brilliance, gradually gained the support of the Cuban peasantry. Through a combination of military victories, shrewd propaganda, and promises of social reform, Castro's movement gained momentum, attracting recruits from all walks of life. As Batista's regime crumbled from within, weakened by corruption, defections, and mounting popular discontent, Castro's rebel army swept across the island, capturing city after city. On January 1st, 1959, Batista fled Cuba, and Castro's forces marched triumphantly into Havana, greeted by jubilant crowds eager for change. Section 5. Cold War Crucible, Castro, Khrushchev, and Kennedy. The Cuban Revolution sent shockwaves throughout the world, particularly in the United States, which had long considered Cuba within its sphere of influence. Initially, Castro enjoyed considerable support in the U.S., hailed as a romantic revolutionary who had overthrown a corrupt dictator. However, his increasingly close ties to the Soviet Union and his implementation of socialist policies, including the nationalization of American-owned businesses, quickly soured relations with Washington. In April 1961, the U.S. government, under President John F. Kennedy, backed a disastrous invasion of Cuba by a group of Cuban exiles at the Bay of Pigs. The invasion was a humiliating failure for the Kennedy administration and further pushed Castro into the arms of the Soviets. The following year, the world watched with bated breath as the Cuban Missile Crisis brought the U.S. and the Soviet Union to the brink of nuclear war. Castro's Cuba, once a playground for American tourists, had become a focal point of Cold War tensions, a pawn in a dangerous game of superpower rivalry. Section 6. The Price of Revolution, Social Progress, and Authoritarian Rule. In the aftermath of the Bay of Pigs invasion, Castro formally embraced socialism and aligned Cuba firmly with the Soviet Union. With Soviet aid and guidance, Castro embarked on an ambitious program of social and economic reforms. His government implemented universal healthcare and education, dramatically improving literacy rates and life expectancy. Castro's policies also led to significant advances in racial equality, challenging Cuba's long history of racial discrimination. However, these social gains came at a high price. Castro's government, facing constant threats from the U.S. and internal dissent, became increasingly authoritarian. Political opposition was ruthlessly suppressed, freedom of speech was curtailed, and independent media outlets were shut down. Thousands of Cubans deemed enemies of the revolution were imprisoned, forced into exile, or executed. Castro's Cuba, for all its social progress, had become a one-party state where dissent was not tolerated. Section 7. Legacy of a Comandante, a world divided. Fidel Castro ruled Cuba with an iron fist for nearly half a century, weathering numerous assassination attempts, a crippling U.S. embargo, and the collapse of the Soviet Union. He stepped down from power in 2008, handing the reins of government to his brother Raúl. When Castro died in 2016 at the age of 90, his passing elicited mixed reactions around the world. In Cuba, his death was met with an outpouring of grief from many who viewed him as the father of their nation, the man who had liberated them from American imperialism and brought them social justice. Others, particularly those who had suffered under his repressive policies or fled into exile, viewed his passing with a mixture of relief and resentment. Outside Cuba, Castro remained a polarizing figure, hailed by some as a champion of the Third World and reviled by others as a brutal dictator. Fidel Castro's legacy is a complex and contested one, a mix of undeniable achievements and tragic failures. He was a product of his time and place, a man who embodied both the hopes and the contradictions of the revolutionary era. His impact on Cuba and the world will continue to be debated for generations to come.